My daughter didn't know I had already changed my will 3 weeks before she asked me to leave my own home. That's the part that still gets me. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table I'd built by hand back in 1987, the one my wife and I refinished twice over the years. And she smiled at me like I was a stranger whose name she couldn't quite place, and I just sat there, sipping my coffee, thinking, you have no idea what's already been done. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My name is Gordon. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county. Roads, bridges, drainage systems. Nothing glamorous, but honest work that paid well and let me build something real. When I retired 4 years ago, I had the house paid off, a solid 401k, and enough in savings to live comfortably without touching Social Security for a few more years. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't struggling either. My wife, Patricia, passed away 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 14 weeks from diagnosis to the end. There aren't words for that kind of loss, so I won't try to find them here. What I will say is that after she was gone, the house felt enormous in a way it never had before. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a big backyard with a garden she'd kept for 20 years. All of it still there. All of it quieter than I ever thought a house could be. My daughter Cora was the one who kept me going those first 2 years. She'd come over on Sundays, bring food, sit with me. She's a good person at her core. I still believe that. I want to say it clearly before I get into everything else, because none of this is simple. She met her husband about 5 years ago. His name is Kevin. He does something with real estate, property management, I think, though he's never been specific about it. And I've learned not to ask too many questions when someone is vague about how they earn money. He's tall, charming in the way that people who've practiced being charming tend to be, and he has an answer for everything. I noticed that early on. No matter what you said to Kevin, he had a response ready. Not a conversation, a response. There's a difference. They got married 2 years ago. I paid for the wedding, not because they asked me to. Well, actually, Kevin suggested it might be a meaningful gesture, given that Cora's mother wasn't there. I wrote the check. $42,000 for a Saturday in June at a venue outside of Columbus. I don't regret it. I wanted Cora to have that day. What I didn't expect was what would come after. About 8 months after the wedding, Cora called me and said she and Kevin were having some financial difficulties. Kevin's property management business had hit a rough patch, a few vacancies, a tenant dispute that had gone to court, some unexpected maintenance costs. She asked if they could stay with me for a while, just to get back on their feet. A few months, she said, just until things stabilized. I said yes without hesitating. This was my daughter. Of course she could come home. They moved in on a Thursday in October. Kevin brought more stuff than I expected. A second truck full of boxes, a large leather sectional that took up most of my living room, a 65-inch television that he mounted on my wall without asking. I told myself it was fine. People need their things. They were going through a hard time. The first month was fine, more or less. Cora cooked a few times, they kept to themselves mostly, and Kevin was polite enough at dinner. He called me Gordon, right from the start, which struck me as odd. Most people my daughter dated had called me Sir or Mr. Whitfield, at least at first, but I let it go. By the second month, things had shifted in a way I couldn't quite name yet. Little things. Kevin started using my parking spot in the driveway and leaving his car there even when I needed to get out. The thermostat got moved up to 74 degrees. Patricia and I had always kept it at 68, and when I turned it back, I'd find it moved again the next morning. My chair in the living room, a recliner I'd had for 15 years, the one I watched the news in every night, started being occupied by Kevin when I came downstairs. None of these things were large enough to fight about. That's the thing about this kind of situation. It's designed to make you feel like you're overreacting. You can't point to any single thing and say this is the problem without sounding petty. But all of it together was something. I just didn't have the language for it yet. In the third month, Kevin started talking about the master bedroom. He brought it up casually, the way he brought up most things he actually cared about, as if the thought had just occurred to him, as if it was barely worth mentioning. We were in the kitchen one morning and he said, almost as an aside, that Cora had been having trouble sleeping because the guest room got too much morning light. He said the master bedroom, my bedroom, faced west and would be much quieter. I looked at him. He kept talking. He said it would only be temporary. He said he knew it was a big ask. He said something about how Cora had mentioned wanting to start trying for a baby, and a comfortable night's sleep was important for that, and he just wanted to make sure she had the best conditions. I said I'd think about it. I didn't think about it. I knew immediately that the answer was no. That bedroom was where Patricia and I had slept for 23 years. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. I wasn't moving out of that room. I told Cora the next day, privately, without Kevin present. I explained it gently. I said I understood they needed their space, but that room wasn't something I was willing to give up. I thought she understood. She nodded. She said she got it. That evening at dinner, Kevin brought it up again, this time directly. He said he and Cora had talked and they really felt like the arrangement wasn't sustainable long-term with the current bedroom situation. He used phrases like quality of life and fair distribution of space as if we were in a mediation session. I listened to all of it. Then I said very clearly that my answer was no and that I'd appreciate it if we didn't revisit the subject. Kevin looked at me for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "Of course. Your house, your rules." I should have known that smile meant something. 3 days later, I came home from a doctor's appointment, just a routine checkup, nothing serious, and found that some of my things had been moved. Not all of them, just enough. A box of my books from the hallway shelf, my extra set of golf clubs from the closet near the garage, a few items from the bathroom cabinet, moved to the basement. I stood at the top of the basement stairs and looked down. There was a small folding table down there, a cot that hadn't been unboxed yet, and my belongings stacked in the corner. I didn't say anything that night. I went to my bedroom, sat on the edge of my bed, and thought for a long time. I'm not someone who panics. 31 years of engineering taught me that when something goes wrong, you stop, you assess, and you figure out what you're actually dealing with before you do anything. So that's what I did. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Beverly. She's been my lawyer for almost 20 years, handled Patricia's estate, knows every detail of my finances. I told her what was happening. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always appreciated about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Gordon, I want you to start documenting everything." I asked her what she meant. She said dates, times, what was said, what was moved, anything that was changed in the house without your permission. She said, "You own that house outright. No one can make you leave it. But I want a record in case this escalates." I asked her if she thought it would escalate. She said, "In my experience, when someone starts moving your belongings to the basement while you're out of the house, they've already decided where they think this is going." I bought a small notebook that afternoon. I started writing things down. The following weekend, Kevin made his move. We were all at dinner. I'd made pot roast, something I did every Sunday since Patricia passed, a way of keeping some kind of continuity, and Kevin set down his fork about halfway through the meal and said he needed to talk to me about something important. I put my own fork down and looked at him. He said that he and Cora had been thinking seriously about their future. He said they wanted to stay in this house, not just temporarily but long-term. He said with a baby potentially coming, they needed stability. And he said, and I will remember this for the rest of my life, he said, "Gordon, we need the master bedroom and the primary living space. That means we need you to either move to the basement permanently or we need to think about other arrangements." I looked at Cora. She was looking at her plate. I said, "Other arrangements." Kevin said, "If you're not comfortable with the basement, you might be happier somewhere else. A condo, maybe, a retirement community, somewhere with people your own age." My daughter said nothing. She kept looking at her plate. I pushed back my chair, stood up, folded my napkin, and set it next to my plate. I said, "I appreciate you being direct with me, Kevin," and I went to my room. I called Beverly again that night. I told her what happened. She said, "Did he ask you to leave your own home?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Gordon, I need you to do a few things this week." We talked for 40 minutes. What came next, I kept entirely to myself. I didn't discuss it with Cora. I didn't respond to Kevin's comments when he made them over the following days, and he made them, casually, consistently, wearing me down the way water wears down stone. Every few days, there'd be another mention of the basement, another comment about the bedroom, another suggestion that a retirement community might actually be a wonderful option for someone in my situation. I let him talk. I nodded sometimes. I said, "I hear you," when the silence got uncomfortable, and I kept writing in my notebook. What I didn't tell them, I had asked Beverly to pull every document related to the house. The deed, the title, everything, my name. Only my name. Only my name. I had also asked her to review my will, which at the time left the house and the majority of my estate to Cora. Beverly suggested some revisions. I agreed to them. I also called my financial advisor, a man named Dennis who had managed my retirement accounts for 12 years. I asked him to move a significant portion of my liquid assets, savings, money market accounts, into a structure that would require both my signature and Beverly's to access or transfer. "Just a precaution," Dennis said. I said yes, that's exactly what I wanted. One Tuesday morning in February, about 11 weeks after they'd moved in, I was in the kitchen early. I'm always up before 6, old habit, and I heard Kevin on the phone in the hallway. He didn't know I was there. He was talking to someone, and I caught pieces of it. He said something about waiting it out. He said something about once we get the bedroom situation settled, and then he said clearly, once his name is off the deed, it changes everything. I stood very still. He walked past the kitchen doorway a moment later, saw me, and paused. Something crossed his face. Not quite fear, but close, an adjustment. He said, "Morning, Gordon." I said, "Good morning, Kevin. Sleep well?" He said he had. I poured my coffee and said nothing else. That afternoon, I drove to Beverly's office and we had a conversation I'd been building toward for weeks. I told her what I'd heard. She said, "That's what I was afraid of." She pulled out the revised documents she'd prepared. I signed them. Then we went through the next steps. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, I told Cora I needed to talk to her. Just the two of us. I asked Kevin to give us some time, and he left for the gym. I sat down with my daughter at the kitchen table, the one I built, the one her mother helped me sand and finish, and I told her everything. I told her about the phone call I'd overheard. I told her about the will. I told her that her husband had been, at best, planning to outlast me in my own home, and at worst, angling towards something far more deliberate. Cora started to cry. I want to be honest about this part, because it was the hardest part. She said she hadn't known. She said Kevin had told her this was the only way they could stabilize, that once they were secure she'd make it up to me, that he had a plan. She kept saying she didn't know it had gotten this far. I sat with her in that. I handed her a napkin. I told her I believed her, and I mostly did. I think Cora got swept up in something she didn't fully see until it was sitting right in front of her. But believing someone and protecting yourself from the consequences of their choices are two different things. I'd learned that much. I told her what I had done. The accounts, the will, the documentation. I told her Beverly had everything in order. Cora was quiet for a long time. Then she asked what happened now. I said, "That depends on Kevin." Kevin came home from the gym to find a folder on the kitchen counter with a letter Beverly had prepared, a formal notice outlining, in precise and legally specific language, that I was the sole owner of the property, that no verbal arrangements had legal standing, that I was requesting they vacate within 60 days, and that any attempt to alter, transfer, or encumber any asset in my name without my written consent would be pursued legally. I was in the living room when he read it. I didn't watch him. I looked out the window at the backyard, at the garden Patricia had planted, at the dogwood tree we'd put in the year Cora was born. Kevin came into the living room holding the letter. He said, "Gordon, I think we need to talk about this." I said, "Beverly is available Tuesday and Thursday afternoons if you'd like to have that conversation through proper channels." He stared at me. I said, "There's a good pot of coffee in the kitchen if you want some." Then I went back to looking at the garden. They were out of the house in 38 days, not 60, 38. Kevin apparently had more options available to him than he'd let on during the months he'd been telling my daughter they had nowhere else to go. Funny how that works. The week they left, I went down to the basement and looked at the cot and the folding table and the boxes he'd moved down there to show me where he thought I belonged. I carried everything back upstairs myself. It took 3 trips. I was a little winded by the end of it, but I managed. I repainted the master bedroom that spring. A slightly lighter shade of the same blue Patricia had chosen. She'd always loved that color, called it quiet water. I kept her reading glasses on the nightstand. Cora and I have had several conversations since then. Long ones, hard ones. She's in counseling now, working through some things. I don't know what her and Kevin's situation is, and I haven't asked. I told her the door to this house is always open to her, specifically, and that I love her and that will never change. I also told her that love doesn't require me to hand over my home. The last time she came to visit, she sat at the kitchen table and ran her hand along the surface the way she used to do when she was small. She said, "Dad, I'm so sorry." I said, "I know you are." We didn't need to say anything else after that. What I want people to understand, if you're in something like this, if you feel the walls closing in and you think maybe you're the one being unreasonable, maybe you're asking too much just by staying in the house you built, is this, the doubt they plant in you is a strategy. It works because you love them, and loving them doesn't mean you're wrong. My name's on that deed. I put 31 years of work into that life. I built that table by hand. I planted that garden with my wife, and she died in this house, and her glasses are still on the nightstand, and no one is going to move me to the basement of my own history. I have a good attorney. I took good notes, and I was up every morning before 6. That's all it took. I still think about that kitchen table sometimes. The one I built in 1987, the one Patricia and I refinished on a Sunday afternoon with the radio on and sawdust in our hair. Kevin sat at that table and told me, with a straight face, that I should move to the basement of my own home. And for a few days, I'll be honest, I wondered if maybe I was the difficult one. Maybe I was holding on too tight. Maybe wanting to stay in the room where my wife spent her last years made me unreasonable. That doubt is what they count on. I understand that now. What Kevin didn't account for was something simple. I had spent 31 years solving problems for a living. When a bridge has a structural issue, you don't panic. You stop, you assess, you document, you find the load-bearing truth underneath all the noise. That's what I did, not out of anger. I was never angry, not really, but out of clarity. There's a difference between reacting and responding, and that difference is everything. I think about what Cora said when she finally sat with me at that table. She said she hadn't known how far it had gone. I believe her. But I also know that love, on its own, isn't a plan. She loved me and still nearly lost me the house I built my life in because she trusted someone whose intentions she hadn't examined closely enough. That's not a character flaw. It's what happens when we let our feelings outrun our judgment. I've done it too. Most people have. What I learned from all of this, what I'd want anyone in a similar situation to hold on to, is that integrity isn't just about being a good person in easy moments. It's about knowing what you've earned, what you owe yourself, and what you will not hand over simply because someone is persistent about asking. Kevin was charming and consistent and patient, and none of those qualities belong exclusively to good people. I had to remember that my decency didn't require me to be anyone's doormat. The notebook I kept, the calls to Beverly, the early mornings thinking it through, none of that was dramatic. It wasn't a confrontation. It was just a man doing the quiet, unsexy work of protecting what was his. Intelligence without courage is just awareness of your own helplessness. You have to be willing to act on what you know, even when it means sitting across from your own daughter and saying hard things out loud. And the courage part, that's the piece people underestimate. It would have been easier to give Kevin the bedroom, easier to move to the basement and tell myself it was temporary, easier to keep the peace. But there is a cost to that kind of easy, and you pay it in small pieces until one day you look up and you don't recognize the life around you. Patricia's reading glasses are still on the nightstand. The room is the same quiet blue she chose. I wake up every morning before 6, make my coffee, and look out at the garden. That's what I held on to. That's what was worth protecting.